Hello, everyone, and welcome to Decision Support Tools Workshop. My name is Suzanne Fye. I'm a data analyst with Iowa Soybean Association, and today I will be presenting with my colleagues Aaron Prestholt and Josh McDaniel. So, Peter Kivariga is our senior research scientist. He's the brains behind this program, and he is giving another presentation, so he will not be presenting today. So first of all, let's talk about where our tools are located. You can go to iasoybeans.com, go to research, and then results and tools. Under results of our work, you'll see a list of all the tools that are available. Today, we're going to cover 4 tools: Cover Crop Economic Simulator, Economic Viewer of On-Farm Studies, which is our newest tool based on ISOFAST, which was our flagship, Soybean Variable Rate Planting Simulator, Soybean Quality Economic Simulator. So, starting with the Cover Crop Economic Simulator, there are spreadsheet versions of cover crop economics out there, primarily from Iowa State University and NRCS, and we do stand on their shoulders. But why build another tool? Well, first of all, we want to reduce farmer time further to research basic cover crop economics and address the potential impact of yield change. We also want to raise awareness about cover crop cost mitigation opportunities, which are not covered in either of the spreadsheet tools. We want to highlight some potential grazing, forage, and seed production income. We also want to promote the societal and long-term financial benefits from cover crops, which are not, again, presented in the spreadsheet tools. So when you open the tool, this is what it'll look like. Across the top, there are tabs for application, user guide, interactive erosion map, which I will be explaining later on in the presentation. There's a static erosion map for people whose internet connection is not great, and there are resources. Resources are terrific. I will only be able to mention one of them today. So on the left-hand side, we have pages. I will explain in detail how to navigate them. There are 5. We have the grid, which is the heart of the tool. And I will be spending the most time explaining how to read the tool, because despite it having a lot of numbers on it, it really is quite simple. At the bottom, you will see grid increments. These are called the sliders, and I will definitely explain how they work with the tool. I want to quickly bring attention to the fact that this tool was subsidized by NRCS and Iowa Soybean Association. So what is the economic net return? Well, if you have costs and you have offsets and you combine those and there's a difference in yield and you figure out what the dollar value of that yield change is, put it all together, that is your net return. So let's look at the pages first and navigation. Like I said, there are 5 pages, and they are listed in the navigation menu. At the bottom of every page is also a set of buttons that correspond numerically to the numbers of the pages. Throughout the tool, you can edit values on different pages by clicking in a cell, swiping over the old value, and typing in a new one. So the average corn yield, for example, if your yield is higher or lower, you click on that, swipe over, type in the new yield value. Same thing for corn grain market price. You can pick corn or soybean. You can swipe over that and type in current market price. On every page at the bottom is also a summary of the values for that page. So for costs, for income, and for mitigations. Page 1 is a little different because it summarizes the difference between your cost, income, mitigations, but not the added value for the greater good. And I'll explain why later. So, how to read the dynamic net return grid? Well, whatever's on page 1 in that dynamic net return box is going to show up in the 0 yield change row at all times. Whenever that value changes, the entire grid will change. But that value is always what will show. If there's no yield change, that is your dynamic net return. So the grid is influenced by sliders as well as changes to your cost, income, and mitigations. Here, the grid increments determine uh, the level of change of yield up or down in bushels per acre. Our default is 1 bushel per acre, so 1%, sorry, 1% yield change. So 1% of 200 bushels is 2. So the increment here is going to go up or down in 2 bushel increments. The blue rows show a yield increase. The red rows show a yield decrease. If you change that to 0.5% of 200 is 1 bushel an acre. So it now goes up, you can see, in 1 bushel increments and down in 1 bushel increments. So for the market price change increment slider, it will go from 0 to $1, and the default is 15 cents. So here you can see if your grain market price is $5, that will show up in the center column of the grid, and it will go up in 15-cent increments and down in 15-cent increments based on your slider choice. Now, to read the grid, if your market price goes up to $5.25 and you have a 1 bushel an acre increase in yield, instead of your dynamic net return being 25 cents an acre, it is now $5.50 an acre. If the market price of grain goes down to $4.50 a bushel and you lose 1 bushel of yield per acre, now your dynamic net return value is a negative $4.25 an acre. So why do we care about this information? Why do we need to have this grid? Well, based on research conducted by Iowa Soybean Association, long-term cover crop trials, what we have noted is that of these 9 farmers who conducted the trials, in the first year, the majority of them lost yield. However, by the second year, the majority of them had fully recovered, if not exceeded, their yield of the non-cover crop strips in their trial. And by the third and fourth year, we're seeing significantly more positive than negative results in yield response to cover crop. So now let's talk about cost to establish and income opportunities. As I mentioned, costs and income will both have a summarization on the bottom of that particular page. And if you click the Edit Formula button, it will open up to show you the values that make up your per acre cost to establish or per acre income selections. If you click on the Hide Formula button, it will close that part of the equation. So let's talk about cost mitigation opportunities. As I mentioned, these are not covered in any of the spreadsheet tools. These include things like state and federal assistance. And for Iowa, there's now a first-year cost share payment of $25 an acre. Ecosystem services are, this is the one resource I will mention. There is a document in there published by Iowa State University that lists 9 or 10 ecosystem service opportunities. One of them is the Iowa Soybean Association's Soil and Water Outcomes Fund, and they will pay for carbon sequestration and improved water quality. The third category that is covered on the cost mitigation page that is not included in any of the spreadsheets is soil health. And in particular, we focused on erosion reduction, which has perhaps the greatest impact on economics for several areas of the state. So let's talk a little bit about that. The interactive erosion reduction map was developed by Josh McDaniel, and the first thing you can see is that it's divided into HUC 12 watersheds. Now, below this, if you uncheck the watersheds layer, it will show a map of the state. And as you hover over each of the counties, it will show you the county name as well as the 2020 average land value per acre. You can zoom in on this map to more accurately locate your field so that when you click back to the watershed map, it's a lot easier to locate. So here, the formula for calculating the value of the soil that is lost to erosion that is salvaged by cover crops is the 2007 to 2020 average erosion in tons per acre by Huck 12 watershed as calculated by Iowa State University's Daily Soil Erosion Project. We take half of that value, not assuming that cover crops will reduce erosion completely, but let's say it mitigates erosion by a 50% reduction. We take the 2020 county average farm land sale price, which in 2021 is significantly higher, and we will be making adjustments to the map, times 0.001, which is the approximate depth in inches of 1 ton soil per acre. So for areas, even here within the Des Moines lobe, there are some, because of the cost of the land per acre and because of the amount of erosion, the value of that topsoil loss can be fairly significant. So let's look at page 5, community value, which is added value for the greater good. These values do not impact the net return on page 1. And the reason for that is pretty simple. It totally varies by location, number of acres in a particular location, their relative proximity to water bodies and waterways, but they are nonetheless very real, tangible results. So let's look at reduced water purification costs. This is significant, as well as safer water for recreation and wildlife, being able to go and swim in Iowa's lakes. We're talking about reduced flooding. This is very important, especially when you look at it in terms of the reduced federal insurance costs that have to be paid out for flooding. So now let me take a look at 3 cover crop economic simulation examples. I'm going to show 2 that are in both corn and soybean and 1 that is in relay cropping with soybean. So let's just say then in the cost mitigations, we are looking at a first year cost share payment. We're looking at erosion reduction of $8 an acre. And we're including a value for soil health organic matter improvement and for water retention. So the total of this is summarized mitigation values are 4308. And if you subtract the default costs for cover crops, we are now at $4.45 if there's no yield change per acre. And this will be the same for soybean if there's no yield change. Let's go back to corn and look at that. So corn, if you have a net positive of $4.45 and you get a yield increase of 1 bushel an acre, it about doubles what your income is there. And it pretty much will cover a yield loss of 1 bushel an acre. In soybean, because the value per bushel is so much higher, it's almost a 4-fold increase with a 1 bushel yield increase, and it's double the loss of that for double that amount in loss for a 1 bushel loss. So now let's look at a similar scenario where instead of using the state value, we're looking at using the Ag Outcomes 2021 Soil and Water Outcomes Fund average payout per acre, which is $33.46. And let's take an area that's a little more highly erodible, $9.05 value. And let's only include improved soil health without the improved water retention value. Here, we have a net of $8.89 an acre without any yield change. And again, that's going to be the same for soybean. But in corn, you can lose a bushel yield per acre and still not be anywhere near having a negative dollar value. And if you start gaining in yield, it's starting to look pretty good at this with these kind of mitigations. I do want to point out that if your yield is lost and the price is high, yes, you're going to have some negative dollars. And if your price is high and your yield gain is high, you're also going to have some significant increases in your net return per acre. So for soybean, again, because of a higher per bushel value of the crop, with the same zero yield change value, you can have with a 1 bushel yield change, we're up to $20, almost $21. And with a yield loss of a bushel, we're only down about $3. So now I do want to quickly point out harvesting cover crop seeds. If that impacts your soybean yield significantly, you can more than make up for it with that loss, even if soybeans go up to $13 bushel, by not having to pay for your cover crop seed, as well as being able to sell the seed. So that's an opportunity for significant income there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues who are going to present the economic viewer of on-farm studies next.
Thanks, Suzanne. Hi, my name is Aaron Prestholt, data analyst with Iowa Soybean Association, and today I'll be walking you through the economic viewer of on-farm studies. The economic viewer of on-farm studies was developed as a quick and easy way to view the economics behind historical on-farm studies conducted through the Iowa Soybean Association. And this is what the landing page looks like. And we will do a walkthrough of the features and then also some examples based on our selections. So first we'll go through how to select your trials you want to look at. This allows you to select a crop, whether you want to look at soybean or corn trials, then select a category of study. In this case, we selected fungicide category on soybeans. And then based on those previous two selections, you can select the products or practices you wish to compare based on studies that ISA has done. Once you select these in the interactive application tab, you will see that you can then customize the cost of application in a per acre basis. So as you can see, we put in a dollar per acre amount of application costs for each of these different products. After this, you can then use the grain market price slider to select and change the grain market price based on the markets or what you think the price of your grain will be. There's also a study information tab, which we'll talk about more later, that gives a more in-depth dive behind the studies and how they were conducted. So once you select the application costs and also your grain market price, it'll output this economic table based on the products that you selected. As you can see, based on these fungicide trials on soybeans, this shows your trial count and the number of years these trials were conducted. Gives a mean yield response or your average yield response for each of these trial categories. It also will give confidence intervals based on your lower bound or your lower yield response that could be expected, and then also your higher yield response in bushels per acre that could be seen. And this is to kind of give you a range of what was seen based on the trials. It'll also give you a break-even yield response. This is the yield response that is required from the use of the product to pay for the cost of the product. It'll also give you a estimated chance of profit based on a probability, and then an estimated average profit based on the mean yield response and the market price that was selected. Another way to view the economics is through the probability curves of yield response. And I know it looks like a lot going on, but it's fairly easy and we'll walk through it. So the break even response is shown as a vertical dashed line. So those colored vertical dashed line correspond to the legend that's on the right based on the different products. And where that vertical dashed line touches the x-axis or the yield response in bushels per acre demonstrates the break-even response required to pay for the product. Another thing to note is that with the probability curves, the further right they go, the higher yield response they have, and the flatter the curve, the larger variability. As you can see, for example, the blue line stretches further to the right, but is flatter. So it has the potential for higher yield response, but also had a larger variability within the trial. So now let's go through an example with the market price and see how it changes when you change the market price for soybeans. So as you can see here, this is the probability curves, and it shows again your break-even response. And on the right-hand side there, you can see from the table, it outputs those specific break-even response values to pay for the product based on $16 per bushel soybeans. When we change that to $12 per bushel soybeans, you can see how the break-even response that's shown via the vertical dashed lines shifted to the right, indicating a higher yield response. And that's because as you look at the break-even response in the table on the right there, you can see how that also increased. And that is demonstrating that with the lower soybean price, but the same application cost, you require a higher break-even yield response to pay for that product. So now if we go back to the $16 per bushel soybeans, you can look at your estimated average profit, and that's based on the mean yield response that was seen in the trials times the market price for soybeans. And again, if you change to $12 soybeans, you can see how in the probability curves, the dashed lines move to the right, indicating a higher break-even yield response, and your estimated average profit dropped. If you're interested to see how these trials were conducted, where they were conducted, and more information on them, you can click on the study information tab and then click here under which trial category type you want to view. And this links directly to ISOFAST, which is Iowa Soybean Association's interactive studies of on-farm strip trials. And this is all of the historical trials that ISA has conducted all in one place. But this will give you much more information behind the economics, and such as what was done, the different locations of those specific trials, weather conditions, yield comparisons, other summaries, and other economics of those trials, aggregate summaries, and even allows you to download a report of those trials that were conducted. And now I'll pass it over to Josh to talk about the soybean variable rate planning simulator.
Thank you, Aaron, for that transition. Now I will be presenting about the soybean variable rate planning simulator tool that we have. So first, I'd like to point out just what the input data for the tool is. So you'll need 3 years of point shape files from SMS that are zipped into a zip file to be able to input that data into this tool. We want to stress we're not collecting your data. When we have you input it, it's only loaded on your own computer, and it's processed online. We don't download it, don't save it. don't upload it, don't do any of that. It stays solely on your computer, because we know how important the data and data security is right now, and wanting to keep that anonymous. And we do now have example data on this tool that you can run. So if you want to see how it works, see what some of the outputs are, get a good example of that, we have that, and it is already set up when you open the tool, as you see on the left hand side there, of the page right here, that you can just hit the aggregate button and it will run that example data, and you can see what the output is for the tool. And then if you want to upload your own data, you'll actually want to go to the drop down under data source and select upload data. And then the button here will pop up, and you'll be able to click that button and then browse to your zip file that has your 3 years of yield data. And it's important to make sure those point shape files are named differently, so then you can select the proper ones for this, where you see year 1, year 2, and year 3. And then you'll be able to also select what kind of yield categories you want, if you want to see yield level, or if you want to see stability zones. You have that select or option as well. And so then once you have your 3 point shape files set in there how you want them, you can then hit the aggregate button there at the bottom, and it will run the tool. And what you'll see initially is this gray box where it's saying, building year 1 grid. That is just a progress bar for the tool. And, if you have a larger field and a slower internet, it may take a little bit to run, maybe a minute. So be patient with it, but it will process that data. And then the output you'll have the 3 years of aggregated yield. And this is just an example. The page itself looks slightly different, but this is an example of what it somewhat looks like. And then for the aggregated yield, that second tab you see at the top there, you'll see this productivity zone map that has also grouped your yield into categories. And that's all 3 years of the yield aggregated together. So where you see the 3 at the top, where you have each year aggregated based off that fishnet for just each singular year, those are then grouped together and put into productivity zones. And you can see there's stable, unstable, and stable for both low and high. And then the means for each of those, just to give you an idea of what your field looked like there in terms of stability and the yield that you achieved. And then once you've looked at those and analyzed those for yourself, you move on to the seeding rate assignment page. And we have 3 different seeding rates you can choose from: the ISU data source, the Midwest data source, and then a user-defined seeding rate. And so for the ISU data source, pretty straightforward. You'll just want to select your cropping district, and then you'll select which category you want to look at there. And then it will give you a recommendation of what your seeding rate change should be for that category, and then what your expected yield increase is. And then below those 2 sliders, you'll also see what your recommended seeding rate for that category is, and then your target plant density for that category. And that tool was those recommendations were developed by Iowa State, obviously. So just to keep that in mind. And then we go to the Midwest data source, where it'll have you put in your current seeding rate. You do have a plant density conversion factor there as well, to play with if you want to look at how, maybe you have a higher density expected, lower density. You can play with that. And then, or you can also just input your current planting density as well, if you don't want to change that conversion factor. And then once again, it'll give you a recommended seeding rate change and also your expected yield increase, just like the ISU data source. And then finally, there's a user defined, where very similar to the Midwest data source. The only difference is you or it will, the recommendations will be different there because there aren't set equations to provide recommendations for the planting density or plant density and seeding rate. Then once you've done all those adjusting and feel good about where you are there, then you can move on to the cost and return analysis. And I know it looks like a lot, and it's a little bit easier to digest yourself when you have a lot of time to look at it and kind of break it down piece by piece. But I'll give the general overview, and then if you have any questions, feel free to contact us because we know it goes a lot in depth. But that top box you see is your yield gain for each selected category. And then your total economic gain is shown on the right there of that box. So that's accounting for the size of the air or the size of each category in the field with the assumed yield increase and then in the adjusted seeding rate as well. That will then output your total economic gain for each yield category there or each zone, if you want to refer to them as that. So, just a pretty straightforward output that, is determined by like seed price as well as the current market value of soybeans. And then that middle left box is your additional seed costs taken into account. So if you have to, plant extra seed, this is where it's taken into account and how much that will actually cost per acre. And so, that will be set by, say, if your seed cost is $57 and you have to plant 70,000 more seeds per acre, that cost is going to be around $40 per acre increase there. So just gives you a nice overview of what that extra seed cost may be. In some cases, the tool may recommend you reduce your seeding rate, and then you'll actually be saving money in some of those categories as well. And then if you move to the right middle, that's your profit per each yield category. And so there it's just looking at what your return increase is in those each yielding area. So your total economic gain minus your increased seed cost, excuse me. And then that's multiplied by the total area to give you those profit for each zone as a whole. And then finally we get to the bottom box there, and that's the profit from the seeding rate change for the entire field. And so, essentially taking all of these values we see here together and boiling it down to what's your total profit for each zone, and then what it is for the entire field, and also what is it per acre. So just a nice kind of summary of everything that's on this cost and return analysis page. And then we get to the break-even analysis, and this one is a little bit simpler. Still a lot going on, but it's a little more concise. And so here, you can edit the soybean price as well as you can add any variable rate costs. So if you have extra equipment costs or extra workers that you have to have help you out with this, you can enter those costs and it will adjust what the economic, what the break-even price and then break-even yield response is needed to account for those. And then you can also, as you see, you can change that total soybean production cost as well. But keep in mind that should be excluding what your seed cost is there. So the top box is the break-even yield response, or in other words, the yield increase needed to cover the cost of extra seeds. And so, for example, for this example with, extra seed cost of $57 per acre, a break-even yield for that for every category in this example is 3.06 bushels. So you need to gain 3 bushels to break even at the very least for each yield category. And then finally, we get to the break-even soybean price. In other words, price of soybean to cover the cost of extra seed and total production cost. And so with this, with the extra cost of $42.90 and yield increase of 15% for that low stable zone, with a cost of production $5.50 per acre, the break-even price is $10.42 a bushel. And so you can see just how for each category that can kind of vary just depending on your, cost of extra seed, your yield increase, and your cost of soybean production overall. And I just wanted to highlight that box where you click to add as many variable rate costs as you want. And then we get to, the question of, well, where do we get these, where are these numbers coming from for these recommendations? And here's an example where the Midwest data source is coming from. And so you see they have, thousands of studies they looked at to come up with these equations for both for all the zones, low, medium, and high, to give these recommendations based off of plant density and the seed yield. And so, we're not just pulling those numbers out of thin air. There's lots of research behind it to back them up. And then we'll go through a quick simulation here of, what you may expect if you're running your own data through the tool. So you can see here, I've laid out on the left-hand side what each yield category looks like and the different recommendations. So you can see with the seeding rate of 110,000 for this example. And then for the low zone, it's recommending a 15% increase in the seeding rate with an expected yield increase of 0.05, excuse me. And you can see that actually for the medium and high zones, it's recommending a seeding rate decrease, that those were overseeded and need to be cut back on. So that, will be an area where we can save money in this example. And on the right is the seeding category map that it's recommending for us in this example. You can see that 125 for the low, so the increase above the 110, and then 95 and 90 for the medium and high, where that decrease is coming from. And so then here we've just kind of simplified the cost and return analysis. Instead of having that big page to show, just broke it down into a table to make it a little easier to digest in this example. So this was the grain price of 14 and the seed cost of 57. Those are adjustable values as well in the tool. You can change those up as you want. Maybe you want to see a grain price of 16 or 10. You can change those. But in this example, you can see that with an average yield in that low zone and a yield increase of 2, we have an economic gain of 28, and then an additional seed cost of $8.29 an acre with a profit of $19.71 per acre. And then the overall profit of $4.73 for that zone. And then take note where, the other two zones, we don't expect a yield increase, but we have a additional seed cost. We have a profit there because we're not paying for that, we're saving money by reducing that seeding rate for those zones. And that's helping add to our total profit by a good amount. Then we'll move to the break-even analysis for this example. Once again, soybean price 14, just the one variable rate equipment cost of $3 per acre, and a soybean production cost of $5.50. Once again, the low zone is the only one we expect a yield increase in of 2 bushels per acre, with that additional cost of $8.29. So we need a break-even response of 0.81. In other words, our break-even cost there, then what we need the soybean price to be is $11 per bushel. And once again, we don't need as high a cost in the medium and high because we're going to be saving money on that seed cost in this example. So you can just, it gives you a nice idea of what to look for and maybe what you could possibly, change if you want to get into variable rate seeding. But really, this tool, we hope it gets you thinking about those kind of things and where you may be able to make adjustments, because as it is a simulation, so it's not set in stone, these values. We don't guarantee that it'll be perfect, but it should help you estimate some of these things. And with that, I'll turn it over to Aaron to tell you about the soybean quality economic simulator.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, so now we'll talk about, like he said, the soybean quality economic simulator. So one thing that this tool will reference a lot that we should probably define is what is soybean quality differentiation? What does that mean? That is the idea that you can separate your field based on quality variability, such as in quality is referencing protein and oil content. So why exactly do we care about doing this? And what are the benefits of quality differentiation? Well, first, there's an economic advantage for US soybeans. When international buyers are looking to buy soybeans, the quality is becoming more and more of a decision factor. Also, we want to give a competitive marketing advantage for farmers so that when they know their quality, they can then market those soybeans differently when selling them into the market. Also, whether you eat it or like it or not, there is an increase in plant-based food sources that use lots of soybean protein products. And also, there's a large increased use of soybean oil. In fact, at our Innovation to Profit conference in 2022, Matt Erickson presented that this graph that shows that soybean oil production and use is projected to increase all the way through 2030, and they don't see it stopping there. So it's going to be very important moving forward. So how exactly do we differentiate our quality? Well, we're going to need technology for that. Uh, with technological enhancements, it creates the potential for at-harvest spatial quality differentiation within your fields. One example of that is a near-infrared on-the-go sensor, and that is used to calculate protein and oil content at harvest, which would just mount right onto your combine. And also, it allows for improved field management for higher quality crop production and better soil health because you'll have a better idea of nutrient uptake and also other field management practices that you're using in your operation. So with all this talk of soybean quality differentiation, we figured that there was a need to demonstrate the economic benefit or potential economic benefit of this quality differentiation. So we developed the Soybean Quality Economic Simulator. The goal and objective of developing this was to demonstrate the economic value of protein premium payments, and that also could be oil premium payments, help farmers to make decisions when they're considering planting the higher quality soybean seed varieties, and of course, as always, give farmers a competitive marketing advantage rather than waiting until it goes to crusher for quality differentiation so then they can sell it at a premium, and then identifying driving factors behind higher quality soybeans. So when you open the Soybean Quality Economic Simulator that's found on iasoybeans.com under the Results and Tools tab, this is what the interface looks like. There's lots of features. First, to start off, there's 3 different tabs that you can select across the top. This is to view premium payments in different lights, such as $1 per bushel premium, $1 per percent protein increase premium, and then also compare those different scenarios. As with all of our tools at ISA, it is completely interactive and adjustable. You can change your grain price, your yield. You can then look at different ways of getting premium payments and also change the scales. But farming operations are not cookie cutter, and everybody has different inputs and costs and savings. So we added 2 buttons to also add those additional costs and savings when looking at planting higher quality soybeans. So when you click the either add costs or add savings, it then brings up a drop down where you can then select different costs and savings types and put in those inputs. And we'll talk a little bit more why we have these features with some of the protein premium contracts that you can plant. And also that tab where you can compare the scenarios, it shows the return matrix, which with different inputs to then compare different scenarios. So then you can see how your return can vary based on those different scenarios. So let's walk through a real world example. And this is an example of a farmer that we had from the 2021 growing season where most of his soybeans yielded around 70 bushels per acre. But then he planted a higher quality variety that yielded only 55 bushels per acre. But one thing with some of these contracts, and that was included in his, was that the seed was paid for by the company that he was planting it for, the seed treatment, and then also transportation after harvest of the seed of the harvest was then transported and paid for by the company he was planting for. So he figured if he had a 70 yield average and then the higher quality only yielded 55 bushels per acre, that he would have lost money. But when you add in these savings and make it customized, you can see that even with the 15% yield decrease based on the protein premium payment and then also the additional savings, he actually came out ahead at about $28.50 per acre. So where can you find contracts like this? Well, they're becoming more popular because of the increased demand in protein and oil from soybeans. So here's an example of a Benson Hill contract, and it's basically they will pay you a premium that's based on the 2023 Chicago Board of Trade prices. It's a base premium of 15% over that market price. And then you can also get an additional 10 cents per a percentage protein over 45%, which may seem pretty high, but when we have been sampling over the last 3 years, we've seen an average based on just normal soybean varieties of close to 36 to 38%. Also, if you end up having to store them and they can't come get them after you sell them, they will pay you to store those as well. And that's why we've added some of those savings features so you can figure that in your calculation. And also they pay for seed and seed treatment. So we thank you for tuning in and listening to our tools. If you have any questions, please contact us. We have Peter Kiveriga, Suzanne Fye, Josh McDaniel, and I'm Aaron Prestolt. And our emails are there, and we're more than happy to walk you through any of these tools or answer any questions you have.